The car in the photograph has no plates. By the time you finish watching this video, you will understand why that single detail, one missing set of numbers on a rusted bumper, connects 60 years of vanished people, a retired police officer who has never once given an interview, and a filing room in rural Pennsylvania that a county archivist named Daniel Mercer was never supposed to fully digitize. And you will understand why, 3 weeks after Daniel made the discovery, he stopped returning calls entirely. Let's start at the beginning. Or rather, let's start at what Daniel thought was the beginning, because that's the cruelest part of all of this. The way something monstrous can arrange itself to look like a coincidence right up until the moment it doesn't. Daniel Mercer was 41 years old and the kind of man who found genuine comfort in organization. People who knew him described him the same way, almost every time. Quiet, methodical, the sort of person who color-coded his grocery lists and kept his shoelaces ironed flat. He'd worked for Harlan County's Records Division for 11 years, long enough to earn the musty, windowless archive room on the basement level of the municipal building as something close to his personal kingdom. The room smelled the way all old government spaces smell, like damp paper, rubber cement, and the specific mineral staleness of decades of recycled air. The fluorescent lights above him buzzed at a frequency just low enough that you could almost tune it out. Almost. Daniel had long since stopped noticing. He brought a thermos of black coffee every morning, arranged his pencils in descending order of length, and he worked. The digitization project had been approved in early March of 2023. The county had received a modest federal preservation grant, enough to fund one archivist, one scanner, and approximately 8 months of labor. The task was straightforward on paper. Scan, catalog, and upload 6 decades of physical case files, beginning with 1963 and working forward. Missing persons, cold cases, unresolved incidents. All of it had been sitting in those metal filing cabinets since before Daniel was born, organized in a system that made sense only to whoever had built it, which meant it made no real sense at all. Someone, at some point, had alphabetized cases by the victim's middle name. Someone else, later, had refiled everything by the arresting officer's badge number, except in the cases where there had been no arrest, which was most of them. Daniel didn't mind the disorder. He actually preferred it. It gave him something to solve. He started, as instructed, with January of 1963. The first file was a man named Robert Aldous Pugh, 53, a coal surveyor who had left his home in Denton Hollow on a Tuesday morning and never arrived at work. The file was thin, 11 pages, a single photograph of Pugh standing in front of his house, a handwritten note from the responding officer, and a closure form dated 8 months later citing voluntarily missing, no evidence of foul play. Daniel scanned each page slowly, the machine making its low mechanical breath of a sound with every pass. He logged the file, uploaded it to the county server, and moved on. He would not move on for long. By the end of his second week, Daniel had processed 47 files. He had noticed, the way you notice something on the edge of your vision without fully registering it, that a lot of these cases had been closed quickly. Weeks, sometimes days. He made a mental note of that without attaching any real weight to it. Underfunded rural county, mid-century America, of course the case closures were fast. Of course. He filed the mental note in the same place he filed other small bureaucratic irritations and kept going. It was the Deanna Marsh file that changed everything. Deanna Marsh was 19 years old when she disappeared from a bus stop outside Colton, Pennsylvania in September of 1971. Her file was thicker than most, 22 pages, including a witness statement, a timeline, and 3 photographs. Daniel fed the first 2 photographs through the scanner without incident. The third one made him stop, not because of Deanna Marsh. He barely looked at Deanna Marsh. He was looking at the car parked behind her on the street. Dark-colored, American-made, mid-size, partially obscured by a telephone pole. And despite the black and white grain of the photograph, despite the distance, despite the 42 years sitting between that moment and this fluorescent basement, he recognized it. Because he had scanned it before. He pulled up Robert Aldous Pugh's file on his monitor, opened the photograph, enlarged it until the pixels started to bleed. The same car, same model, same dent along the rear quarter panel, same slight list to the left rear tire. parked half a block back, almost but not quite out of frame. The kind of thing you'd never notice if you weren't looking. The kind of thing you'd never look for if you didn't already have a reason. Daniel sat very still in his buzzing fluorescent room and felt the coffee in his thermos go cold, and did not notice, and began going back through every file he had already scanned. The car appeared in 31 of the 47 files. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He drove home on automatic, ate something he couldn't remember eating, and sat at his kitchen table with a yellow legal pad until 2 in the morning, writing down case numbers, dates, names. His handwriting, normally precise to the point of being architectural, had started to tilt. He noticed that, and couldn't seem to stop it. 31 files. 31 photographs taken at 31 different locations across Harlan County, spanning from 1963 to 1989. Different seasons, you could tell from the clothing, from the leaves, from the coats people wore or didn't wear. Different times of day, different streets, different victims with different faces and different last known moments frozen in silver and grain. And in the background of every single one, positioned with the patience of something that is very comfortable waiting, the same car. Dark body, mid-size American frame, that same crease along the rear quarter panel like a knuckle pressed into sheet metal. Always partially obscured. Always close enough to be there. Never close enough to be undeniable. Until you looked. Until you'd already looked at 31 photographs and your eyes had learned the shape of it the way your tongue learns the shape of a missing tooth. He went back to the archive the next morning before the building officially opened. He told himself it was professional urgency. He told himself a lot of things in those early days that he would later understand were just ways of avoiding the specific quality of fear that was already growing somewhere behind his sternum. Not loud, not sharp, but low and patient and wrong, like water finding the crack in the foundation. The files from 1989 onward were in the back cabinets, the ones with the drawers that stuck and had to be persuaded open with your hip. Daniel had been avoiding them because of the physical inconvenience. Now he pulled them with both hands and set them on his table in stacks and began. The car was still there in 1992. Still there in 1997. Still there, dark and patient at the edge of a parking lot in Denton Hollow, in a photograph taken on a disposable camera in 2004. The last photograph in the last file where Daniel found it showed a woman named Carla Reyes, 26, a night shift nurse who'd vanished from the parking lot of a gas station in July of 2009. She was buying a bottle of water. The security camera still had film. Someone had printed a single frame, added it to the file, and the car was in it, rear end visible at the lot's entrance, windows dark, no plates. 14 years after Daniel's earliest file. 46 years after the first. The same car. Not the same model. The same car. The dent doesn't move. Dents don't move. But it was the registration that ended what was left of Daniel's professional composure. He almost missed it because it was the kind of thing that hides inside the assumption that someone official has already looked. Each file contained a closure form. Most of them were brief, half a page, sometimes less, citing the same language. Voluntarily missing, insufficient evidence, case closed pending new information that never came. Each form had a signature line. Daniel had scanned those signatures without reading them the way you stop reading the terms and conditions somewhere around the third paragraph. He started reading them. The first signature that made him stop was on the Robert Aldous Pugh file. The one that started everything. The closure officer's name was printed below a signature in the kind of deliberate, upright handwriting that people who've signed a great many official documents develop over time. The name was Harold Voss. Daniel pulled the next file. Closure Officer, H. Voss. The next, Harold Voss. He went through the stack with hands that had developed a slight, constant tremor he was no longer able to attribute to caffeine. The name appeared on 22 of 31 closure forms spanning 1963 to 1989. Not every one, which would have been obvious, which would have been sloppy. Just most of them. Just enough to be a pattern once you'd already found the car. Just enough to make a man alone in a basement feel the temperature of the room drop 2 degrees without the thermostat moving. Harold Voss. Daniel wrote the name on his legal pad and underlined it once, then twice, then pressed hard enough on the third line that the pencil tore the paper. He found Voss's personnel file in a different cabinet, misfiled under a box of decommissioned radio logs from 1988. Whether it was misfiled by accident or design is a question Daniel wrote down and circled and never answered. What the file told him was this. Harold Voss had joined the Harlan County Sheriff's Department in 1961 at the age of 24. He had worked missing persons and cold cases for his entire career. He had retired in 1991 with a commendation for 30 years of dedicated service. The retirement summary described him as methodical, thorough, and deeply committed to closure. The word closure appeared 4 times in 3 paragraphs. There was a photograph of Voss at his retirement ceremony. He was 64 in the picture, white-haired, standing in front of the same building Daniel sat in now. He was smiling at something just to the left of the camera. He had the look of a man who is entirely at ease. A man who has never once worried about being found. And in the background of that photograph, in the municipal parking lot, visible between 2 other vehicles like a face between shoulders in a crowd, was the car. Daniel stood up from his chair. He stood there for a long moment in the buzzing light, not moving, the way you stand when your body understands something before your mind is ready to carry it. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold again. The fluorescent tubes hummed their single endless note. Somewhere above him, through the concrete ceiling, the building was filling with people starting their ordinary days. He sat back down and picked up the personnel file and kept reading, because Daniel Mercer was a methodical man, and methodical men finish what they start, even when they've already found more than they were equipped to find. Harold Voss had not given a forwarding address upon retirement. There was a post office box in Colton listed, which had been closed in 1998. There was an emergency contact listed as Margaret Voss, wife, with a phone number whose area code had stopped being valid sometime in the mid-90s. There was a note, handwritten in the margin of the retirement form in different ink than everything else, added later by someone, that read, "Do not forward correspondence. Per request." But nothing could have prepared Daniel for what he found when he cross-referenced the vehicle records. Took him 3 days to get access. The county's motor vehicle database was not technically within his jurisdiction as an archivist, and he'd had to frame the request carefully, had told the woman in records administration that he needed to verify a vehicle as part of case file authentication, which was both vague enough to be true and specific enough to sound official. She'd handed him a login card without much interest. People trust the man with the pencil and the thermos. They always trust the man who looks like he belongs. Daniel typed in the description. Dark-colored, mid-size American sedan, approximate year range 1958 to 1965, registered within Harlan County. The dent, the list in the rear tire, those weren't searchable. He was working on make and model and time period and hope, which is not a great set of tools, and he knew it. He got 11 results. He went through them one by one, cross-checking registration dates against the photograph dates in the case files, until he found a match. A 1961 Ford Galaxy, dark green, registered in Harlan County in November of 1962. Registered to Harold A. Voss. Re-registered in 1971, 1981, 1991. Never sold. Never transferred. No record of the vehicle ever being reported scrapped or decommissioned. The registration record ended in 2019. Not because the vehicle was sold. Because someone had filed a continuation form using a post office box in Colton that, according to public records, had been closed since 1998. The vehicle was still legally registered. In a county where Daniel now sat alone with all of this. To a man who had closed every case. Who had been in every photograph. Who, by every available record, should have been 86 years old or dead. Daniel's phone rang. He didn't recognize the number. Harlan County area code, no name attached, the kind of number that resolves from nothing and then dissolves back. He stared at it for the 4 seconds it took to stop ringing and understood, in a way that bypassed language entirely, that the call was not a coincidence. That the timing was not a coincidence. That somewhere, in a building he was already inside or not far from one, someone knew exactly what he had just pulled up on the county motor vehicle database. The voicemail icon appeared, and Daniel Mercer, a man who color-coded his grocery lists and kept 11 years of archived silence for his company, found that he could not make himself press play. He listened to the voicemail at 11:47 in the morning, alone in the basement, with the fluorescent lights buzzing their single endless note above him and the weight of 60 years of paper stacked around him on every side. The message was 11 seconds long. There was no voice, no breathing even, or at least nothing that resolved cleanly into breathing. What there was, for 11 seconds, was a sound Daniel could only describe later as the specific quality of silence that exists inside a closed car. That sealed, padded, slightly pressurized quiet that you don't notice until you've been sitting in a parked vehicle for long enough that the world outside starts to feel like something happening to other people. The sound of air that has been breathed and rebreathed and has nowhere else to go. And then, at the very end, a single soft sound, not a word, not quite, that Daniel's nervous system interpreted before his brain could, the way animals hear the pitch that precedes the earthquake. His hand was shaking when he pulled the phone from his ear. His chair scraped back. He was standing before he knew he'd decided to stand. He left the archive room. He left his thermos, his pencils in their descending order of length, his legal pad with Harold Voss's name underlined 3 times through. He walked up the stairs and through the lobby and out through the glass front door of the municipal building into the gray November morning, because he needed to see the parking lot. Because the lot was what his body was already moving toward, the way a man who smells smoke moves toward windows before he fully accepts what the smoke means. The parking lot was half full. A dozen ordinary vehicles. A woman in a green coat walking toward a minivan. The bare trees at the lot's far edge ticking quietly against each other in the wind. And in the far corner, near the chain-link fence that separated the lot from the service road behind the building, nosed in between a salt-eaten pickup and a county maintenance truck as though it had always been there, as though it had perhaps always been there, as though parking lots had been invented partly to accommodate it. A dark green Ford Galaxy. 1961. The rear quarter panel creased like a knuckle pressed into sheet metal. The left rear tire listing slightly. No plates. Daniel stood on the municipal steps and did not move for a very long time. The woman in the green coat got into her minivan and drove away. The bare trees ticked. The Galaxy sat the way it had always sat in every photograph, with the enormous patience of something that does not experience time the way its subjects do. The windows were dark, but they were the kind of dark that exists when someone is being very still inside a space, not the kind that exists when a space is empty. Daniel knew the difference. He was beginning to understand that he had always known the difference, that the difference was something the body tracks even when the mind refuses. He went back inside. He went back to the archive room and he sat down and he began to document everything with a speed and a precision that surprised him. That surprised him the way grace sometimes surprises people who are terrified, who find that fear at sufficient intensity burns away everything that isn't essential and leaves something clear and deliberate underneath. He compiled every file, every photograph, every closure form with Harold Voss's signature, the vehicle registration records, the misfiled personnel file, the retirement photograph with the car visible in the background like a face in a crowd that is looking directly at you while everyone around it stares at the camera. He compiled all of it and uploaded it to the county server and then copied it to an external drive and emailed it to 3 separate addresses. A journalist in Pittsburgh whose name he'd found attached to a long-form piece on rural cold cases, the Pennsylvania State Police Records Division, and his own personal email, because 3 points make a triangle and a triangle is harder to close than a line. He pressed send. He watched the upload bar fill. He breathed. And then he pulled up the state's online law enforcement registry and searched for Harold A. Voss, former Harlan County Sheriff's Deputy, badge number 1147, retired 1991. The registry is public record. This is not widely known, but it is true. It contains current address information for retired officers who maintain their pension status. Harold Voss's address was listed. It was on Denton Hollow Road, 9 miles from where Daniel was sitting. And the record had been updated. This is the part that should not be possible, the part that sits in the chest like something swallowed wrong. The record had been updated 4 days ago. 4 days ago, when Daniel had first pulled up the vehicle registration. 4 days ago, when a man who should have been 86 years old or dead had apparently accessed the same pension registry system and refreshed his record, the way you refresh something to signal that you are still present, still current, still in possession of what is yours. The record listed no phone number. It listed no secondary contact. Under the field marked emergency contact, where Margaret Voss's name and the long-dead phone number had once lived, the field now contained 3 words. Contained, he found it. Daniel closed the laptop. He sat in the buzzing light for exactly long enough to understand that he was not going to simply walk out of this building and drive home and call the police from his kitchen and wait for this to resolve into something manageable. He understood that with the particular clarity that comes when you have already sent 3 emails and pressed send and watched the bar fill, when you have already done the methodical thing, the right thing, the thing that a man with 11 years of careful archival work inside him does by nature and by training. He had done that. It was done. Whatever happened next, the record existed. The triangle existed. You cannot unupload 60 years of evidence to a county server and 2 additional locations. He thought about all 31 people in all 31 photographs. Robert Aldous Pugh, 53, who left on a Tuesday and never arrived. Deanna Marsh, 19, at a bus stop in September. Carla Reyes, 26, buying a bottle of water. He thought about all the files he hadn't finished yet, the ones still in the metal cabinets, the ones that needed the persuasion of a hip to open. He thought about how many more photographs might be in those files. How many more times that dented rear quarter panel was waiting in the grain and the distance and the margin of someone's last known moment. He thought about how Harold Voss had signed 31 closure forms citing voluntarily missing, no evidence of foul play, and how a man only writes that phrase on 31 separate documents if he is very confident about what the evidence is and where it will stay. How a man only smiles like that in a retirement photograph, that at-ease, leftward-looking smile, if he has calculated that the archive will never be fully processed. That the filing system too strange to navigate will stay strange. That the grant will not come or will be too small or the archivist will scan without looking, will upload without reading, will let the signatures pass through his hands like paper passing through a machine. He had not calculated Daniel Mercer. He had not calculated the man who color-coded his grocery lists and ironed his shoelaces flat and found genuine comfort in finishing what he started. Daniel picked up his pencils. He arranged them in descending order of length. He opened his thermos, poured the cold coffee down the small sink in the corner of the archive room, and rinsed it out. He stacked the remaining files on his desk in the order he intended to process them. Then he called the Pennsylvania State Police from his desk phone, the landline, the one connected to the building's main system, and he read them case numbers and dates and file references for 40 minutes. He was calm the entire time, with the calm of a man who has found that the most frightening thing and the right thing are occasionally the same thing, and that doing the right thing anyway is the only category of courage that actually matters. The state police opened a formal inquiry 17 days later. The journalist in Pittsburgh published a piece in early December. The Ford Galaxy was photographed in the lot of a property on Denton Hollow Road in the course of a welfare check. The property was registered to a Margaret Voss, deceased 2003. The officer who entered the house wrote in his report that it was very clean, very ordered, and that every surface held a single photograph. Framed, glass-fronted, dust-free. Each photograph showed a person. Each photograph had been taken from the inside of a vehicle. Each photograph had been taken from the driver's seat. Harold Voss was not in the house. Harold Voss has not been located as of the recording of this video. Daniel Mercer returned to work 4 weeks after the inquiry opened. He asked to finish the digitization project. He was told it was no longer necessary, that the files were now part of an active investigation. He brought the external drive to the state police himself, carried it in both hands like something that weighs more than it should, and left it on a detective's desk and drove home, and that night he slept, for the first time in weeks, without waking. But before he left the detective's desk, the detective asked him one question. She asked him whether he knew what had been in the voicemail, whether he could describe the sound he'd heard in those 11 seconds, what he thought it was. Daniel thought about it for a moment with the particular seriousness of a man who does not answer questions he hasn't fully considered. He said, "It sounded like someone waiting in a car for a very long time. The way a car sounds when it's been sitting somewhere, engine off, and the person inside has been still for so long that the air has settled around them. Like they weren't going anywhere. Like they were just watching." The detective wrote that down. She did not look up from her notepad when she said, "Asterisk, that's what all the victims described too. In the files where there were witnesses, every single one of them said the car had been there for a while before, that whoever was inside just seemed to be sitting there. Asterisk, waiting to see who noticed. There are 60 years of missing people in Harlan County, Pennsylvania, whose files passed through one man's hands and were closed with 2 words and a signature. There is a car that should not still exist, that appears in photographs older than most of its viewers, maintained with a care that suggests it is not a vehicle so much as a practice, a method, a ritual, a way of being present at the edges of other people's last moments without ever being the thing they were looking at. And there is a man named Daniel Mercer who looked, who kept looking, who understood, in the end, that the most dangerous thing you can do to something that has survived by being overlooked is simply to refuse to look away. Every week, Mindshift Stories brings you the cases that keep investigators awake at night, the ones too disturbing for mainstream media. If that sounds like something you need, subscribe now and never miss a story.